In the 7th century BC, Sparta was unique among all the several hundred city-states that surrounded the Aegean.
In every Greek polis, the state played more of a role in governing people's lives than many of us would accept today. Sparta went several degrees better. In no other city-state was the government as intrusive. This was a cradle-to-grave deal.
In fact, it was in the cradle that the first measure of the future Spartan equal was taken. At birth, government overseers examined each newborn infant of the elite to determine if he or she should be allowed to live. Less than superior infants were exposed, the Spartan euphemism for leaving an imperfect child to die in a mountain chasm.
This seems extraordinarily brutal, but the aim is to produce warriors. And so that's what they're looking for in these newborn children.
They needed good men, so I think that they would be unapologetic about the fact that they were breeding the best and strongest that they could.
Girl babies, too, had to be approved by the Board of Overseers, who decided whether they should live or be chucked off the edge of a mountain.
The surviving girls were raised to be mothers. The boys were raised to become Spartan equals, warriors who controlled the government. In Sparta, the government was by the people and for the people, if you were one of the homoioi, the equals. Everyone else, the periokoi and the helots, were non-citizens. For a Spartan boy's first 5 years in the agoge, from age 7 to age 12, a government trainer-in-chief called a paidonomos instructed him in basic literacy and physical education. Discipline and punishment, however, were often meted out by slightly older boys.
The way to think about it is as if the toughest kids from your junior high school were put in charge of you when you just entered first grade. It is, I think, a system that, in a sense, uses the potential cruelty of children towards one another in order to try to teach this Spartan kid, from the very earliest age, that he has to absolutely obey every order that he is given from anyone who is a superior. It is a terrifying sort of vision.
The main lesson in the agoge from day one was to toughen the boys for the hard life that lay ahead of them.
The Spartan training system was clearly meant to test for weakness and to cull out weakness. And throughout his life, a Spartan warrior had to worry about being watched by his fellow Spartans. They were constantly watching him for weakness, watching to see if he is really up to speed.
Again and again, the rule in the agoge is, can you take it? How tough are you? Are you tough enough to be a Spartan male? This is a tough love system, and there's more tough than love.
Spartan girls also received training, but at home.
She was trained from childhood to be tough, to be physically fit at any rate, to be presumably to some extent self-reliant.
Because their raison d'etre was to produce strong sons to defend the community. They ate well, they participated in athletics, so they were, in a way, prime breeding specimens.
At age 12, Spartan boys entered the second level of agoge training, and conditions got much worse. Each boy was issued a single cloth cloak. This was the only garment they were allowed to wear year-round. They were also required to go barefoot, all in the name of toughening them physically and mentally.
Anybody who's been to Laconia in the winter can see that the very idea that you would go barefooted or you'd have a single cloak would kill a modern American within minutes.
Tired and cold, the boys were also hungry.
The evening meals were cooked, if that's the right word, by the helot attendants. And they cooked absolutely horrendous food, apparently. And the most famous meal of the Spartans is what's called the blood soup. It's basically pork with a lot of blood floating around.
Travelers to Sparta were appalled at the Spartan diet. One famous description was recorded by a visiting Sybarite from the north.
He came to Sparta and he said, after sampling this soup, he now understood why the Spartans were so willing to die.
The soup was not only bad, there wasn't enough of it.
You get enough food to survive, but you don't get enough food to be happy. And so you're taught right away that if you want to get enough food to be happy, to feel full, you're going to have to steal it.
That was done in part to keep them sharp, but also in part to teach them survival skills, because it was all part of the business of making a Spartan who would be the kind of guy who could manage to forage around the country and keep himself alive if he had to.
A Spartan child who is caught stealing will be punished, and yet a Spartan child who does not steal will be regarded as a complete wimp. If you are very good at cheating and you don't get caught, then you in fact will flourish.
Toughening and strengthening Spartan adolescents was deemed necessary because of the kinds of battles they would one day fight.
The phalanx is as strong as the weakest link. So the crucial element is to make sure that everyone is more or less equally strong, and that those who are weaker are simply eliminated.
It was said of the Spartans that they were the only nation that when they went to war, things actually got easier for them.
Life in the Agoge was a weeding out process. Boys were continually required to pass tests of strength, flexibility, endurance, and cunning. Failure was severely punished. At the annual festival at the temple of Artemis Orthia, Spartans would gather to watch a test that might be called the grab for the cheese.
The young men of Sparta divide into two groups. One group tries to steal the cheese that is piled up on the altar, and another group armed with whips try to prevent them from doing so. In that kind of melee, there are going to be occasions when people die.
Whereby everybody is being judged, graded in effect, and then there are winners who are given various advantages, various honors. So here's your Spartan. He is trained both to be like everybody else and to subordinate everything to the commonality and to be superior to everybody else.
To help guide them through their training, each Spartan boy was required to take a mentor, an older man whose association with the boy continued for life.
It was the responsibility of the mentor to watch out for a young boy that was in his care, to see that the training was proper, and to see that manners and character were also receiving appropriate attention.
The great irony, however, was that even though they had the best trained military in the world, the Spartans didn't use it to fight other armies.
It's a magnificent military machine, but the attitude of the Spartans seems to be, let's not risk it. Let's not use it. Let's admire it. Let's polish those shields, but let's not use them unless we have to.
It was a system that worked inside Sparta remarkably well for 2 centuries. But then, for reasons that are not entirely clear, Sparta began to look outside its own borders for new people to conquer. Perhaps the war machine was in danger of growing rusty from disuse. Perhaps they were simply itching for a real fight.
The Spartans confidently thought that their two great adversaries, the Argives and the Tegeans, would be pretty easy to defeat.
And they're now ready to expand, as it were, to bring more territory within the same system.
No fine art of Spartan origin has been found that dates after the 7th century BC. It's as if the people of Sparta just stopped making it.
The turning away from the kinds of visual arts that we see as prominent elsewhere is very clearly a self-conscious decision.
It was a decision that coincided with the greatest turning point in Sparta's history, a period known as the Messenian Wars. It began when a population explosion forced Sparta to seek new land and new sources of food.
They solved their problem by annexing an entire country which was both larger in population and territory than Sparta was. So that quirk of fate, that will change the course of Spartan history for the next 300 years.
The land they chose to take over was Messenia, a separate Dorian community directly to the west.
easily or quickly.
The initial difficulty is simply topographical, getting over Mount Taygetus, which at its peak is 8,000 feet. But of course you don't go over the peak, you go round the side, and that means a detour, and that means marching a very long way. So you're very far from your base.
The people of Messenia were on their way to creating their own city-state culture. They resisted, they tried to remain independent, but the Spartans defeated them.
But by the 7th century BC, Sparta ultimately controlled 8,000 square kilometers and became the largest city-state in the Greek Empire. The Messenians were forced to work the land as agricultural serfs called helots.
Helotage is a kind of tenant farming. A helot has a farm to which he must dedicate a certain part of every year's produce to a Spartan master. A particular Spartan master is in charge of each helot's farm, and yet the master doesn't actually own that helot as an out-and-out slave. He can't buy him and sell him.
No other city-state tried to enslave an entire Greek people. There's probably 250,000 residents of Messenia, and Spartan society is coalesced around 10,000 Spartan warriors. So they're vastly outnumbered.
We ought to think of Sparta as a state under siege, not afford the luxury of giving up their security needs.
The situation called for the Spartans to remake their society from top to bottom. They developed new rules that would control every aspect of its citizens' lives.
They are the only Greek population that devotes itself entirely to the arts of war.
According to the Greek historian Plutarch, the architect of this new warrior city-state was a Spartan lawmaker named Lycurgus. Lycurgus reportedly traveled throughout the Mediterranean, gathering the best of military statecraft from Crete, from Ionia, and from Egypt. He also received divine guidance from the oracles at Delphi, where it was said advice from Apollo was transmitted directly to him. With these new discipline guidelines, Sparta eventually transformed itself into a great militaristic society.